Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 31 of Radio Europa. Tonight I'm joined by our regular contributors, Laura and Darth. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
And we're going to discuss Orban's baby boom and Salvini's strike against the shady financiers of Europe. But before that, I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to do this week's roundup of the news. Laura.
Yeah, hello everybody. I hope you're all well. So the news from this week, the European Commission has issued a report called the EU Code of Conduct, which is congratulating IT companies for now assessing 80% of flagged content within 24 hours, as opposed to 40% of flagged content within 24 hours, which they were achieving in 2016. So it's basically just a big online crackdown of speech which is considered to be racist and xenophobic. So watch out for that wrong think. Guy Verhofstadt, European Parliament's representative in the Brexit negotiations, has today compared Tory Brexiteers to leaders of the French Revolution and joking at the end that they all ended up on the guillotine. Over to Britain, a 12-year-old girl in Britain has been attacked by Black and Pakistani teenagers this week. The attack was hardly picked up by the mainstream media at all, much unlike the similar case of Jamal, who, as we all know, was the Syrian refugee who had some water thrown in his face. The British mainstream media have also been reporting on a high number of online trolls who have been harassing Instagram models who are in interracial relationships. So The Sun were horrified to report that white girls were being harassed with phrases such as "burn the coal, pay the toll," and "coal birders get the rope." Hungary have sent their support to Donald Trump's idea of a southern border wall, saying that they consider the USA an ally and a friend, and that building their border security in Hungary has kept their citizens safe. And then just quick news from the Yellow Vests and Brexit. So the Yellow Vests are now in their 13th week. There's not really anything new to report there other than it's becoming increasingly violent. Police are using tear gas on civilians. Things are being set on fire. I'm sure you've all seen the violent pictures from this week. And Project Fear in Britain regarding Brexit is just reaching ridiculous new levels. So last week they were saying that a plague of rats would be released if there was a no-deal Brexit. And this week they're saying that the NHS are stockpiling body bags. So that's it from me.
Well, there's some interesting stuff in there. I particularly like the story about the Instagram models. I'm sure everybody had a little chuckle at some of the things that were in the newspapers. So I think two of the most uplifting stories of this week have been Orban's new pro-natal policies and, of course, Salvini's discussion of the bank. We'll start with Orban's policies in Hungary. Darth, I believe you've been looking into those. Can you just sort of give the listeners a rundown of what this policy is? Darth?
I bet he's muted himself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think I did the opposite of what I meant to do, and I was unmuted and then muted myself, so apologies.
No worries, go ahead.
So Viktor Orban has announced a 7-point family protection action plan in his State of the Nation address in Budapest. So he said, this is Hungary's answer to challenges rather than immigration. And he seems to be the only person who has decided that we don't want to solve our declining population by importing people from foreign countries. We would rather do it themselves. So the points that are in this article, I'm reading here from Voice of Europe's article. Every woman under the age of 40 years of age will be eligible to preferential loans when they first get married. The preferential loan of the family home purchase scheme will be extended. Families raising 2 or more children will now also be able to use it for purchasing resale homes. The government will repay 1 million forints of the mortgage loan of the families with 2 or more children. This measure was first announced in August 2017 for families with 3 or more children, with the government paying off 1 million forints of family mortgages for every third and subsequent child from January 2018. The measures have now been extended to include families raising 2 children. Women who have raised at least 4 children will be exempt from personal income tax for the rest of their lives. The government will launch a car purchase subsidy programme for large families. Families raising at least 3 children will be eligible to a grant of 2.5 million forints to buy a new car seating at least 7 people. The government will create 21,000 creche places over 3 years, and grandparents will also be eligible to a child care fee and look after young children instead of parents, the Prime Minister added. So that's the 7 points that have been highlighted as the kind of main points of this this package.
Well, it's a very exciting policy, and I wish that I'm sure everybody would wish the same, that the Western European governments were doing something similar. It sounds a lot like a total mobilization of Hungarian society to this end, which I think is good. Do you think that that's the difference between West and East, is that somebody like Viktor Orban has some coherent, joined up long-term vision for the future, whereas our politicians are just thinking short-term, pay the pensions sort of thing?
I don't know. I mean, I've said this to you off air, and I'll say it again here. I know it doesn't really can answer your question, but you have groups of people saying we need to have fewer children, because it's better for families. Apparently, it's better for people's mental health. You'll be happier, and also because it's bad for the environment. And then the same people say, we have a declining population. We can't fix it ourselves because people are choosing to have fewer children, but they fail to admit that it's just the cost of living is now so great. But we also then need to import people from mainly third world countries to support the declining population. And to me, that is just, you can't have both of those viewpoints and agree with both of them. You have to pick one. I would respect somebody who said, we feel the best way to save our population is to import people from the third world. As much as I disagree with it, I at least respect them for having that view and not then saying the opposite as also a valid opinion as well.
Yeah, and I think we agreed on that off air, that this is a problem in that the messages from the people that would denounce Orban's policy aren't coherent. They don't complement one another. They're actually contrary to one another. Laura, if I can just come to you on this. I know you haven't specialised on this topic this week, but and without wishing to play up to those stereotypes, as a woman, how do you feel about that policy, and do you think that would be beneficial for Western Europe as well?
Yeah, well, I actually think it's fantastic, and I wrote an article for Defend Europa. I've just posted it in the chat in July last year, and Viktor Orban said that do you know what, like, leaders across Europe are saying that we need replacement migration to help save our country's declining populations. Yeah. Well, Viktor Orban said in July of last year that he wanted to keep Hungary Hungarian. So he set himself the goal of hitting the fertility rate of 2.1 by the year 2030. So it goes back to what you just asked Darth, really, about has he got a long-term goal? And obviously it has, because it's not something that you can change in a day. It needs to be a goal that's set in motion, and it's going to take a couple of decades to catch up. But the fertility rate was 1.5 in August 2017, and it is actually increasing. So it's not just, this isn't obviously the only thing that he's done, and I know that Darth read out a big long list of things that he's putting in place, but his priority really is to keep Hungary Hungarian. And he's also doing things like, I think he changed the constitution so that it had more focus on marriage between men and women. And as soon as he did that, people did actually start getting married earlier. I'm not sure what the magic thing that what he did, but obviously when you get married earlier, the women are more fertile when they're younger, and it was resulting in an increased number of births. So he's just doing all sorts of thing. In fact, I've got the quote. This is what he said: "Hungary shall protect the institution of marriage as the union of a man and a woman, and the family as the basis of the nation's survival." So he changed that and put that into the constitution, and marriages went up just like magic. So he's doing all kinds of great things in the country, but I completely support this. I think that it's just one policy of many that we need to implement across the West. So we can't just say, have more babies, have more babies. Obviously, we also need to close the borders. We need to discuss repatriation. There's all sorts of dodgy people behind the scenes that have got control of media and central banks and things like that. And obviously that needs to be addressed as well. But I think increasing native fertility rates is definitely something that we need to be focusing on as well.
Go ahead.
I think the worrying thing is, and I'm sure everybody who's listening probably has an idea of this, like the average fertility rate, this is a graph from 2016, every single main European country is under the magic number of 2.1 for fertility rate. Now, 2.1 is the number that is deemed to be what is needed to keep a country at a stable a level, you know. So it's not growing, it's not decreasing, it's just for it to remain stable. So you need to be having 2.1 children per person, I'm guessing. And every single country in 2016 was under that, the highest being France, which was about 1.92, and Spain and Italy had the lowest at 1.34. Ironically enough, I find it funny that those are the two probably most Catholic countries in Europe. But you know, so Italy and Spain being under 1.34, and then you've got the UK and Ireland, which are almost the same, maybe 1.7. You know, so none of the European countries are having enough children to stay stable in their population levels. So, and Hungary seems to be the only country that's trying to at least take matters into its own hands instead of relying on people coming to their country. It's saying, well, we're going to fix this problem ourselves. And you know, whether you agree with it or not, I think it's a very noble thing to do, to say we have a problem, let's fix it ourselves, instead of relying on other people coming to our country to prop us up.
Yeah, I think that is important, but I think what it shows as well is just that actually these policy, you know, the Western leaders, they make out that it's impossible and that the only solution is to import people from the third world. But I mean, Orban shows actually, if you've got the will, it's pretty damn easy. And I mean, do you think that this is the problem with the West, is that it's not that they think they can't do it, it's just the will isn't there, and that I feel like they have an ideological agenda. They are ideologically driven to oppose fertility policies for natives, and equally driven to support the importation of non-Europeans. I think that's an ideological thing.
Yeah, I think it's just the West has become so kind of obsessed with this kind of apologizing for our forefathers' sins, that we can't, you know, have a country which is, you know, of one race of people or one group of people. It has to be multi-nation countries, which then, I mean, part of that I think is the thought that if we do this, you're never going to have another general war like World War I and World War II. But I just don't think that is a viable option. I think that the more you have a diversing population, the more likely you are to have internal conflict within a country, let alone countries fighting each other. And it's just going to destabilize the country more. You know, the countries in Europe during World War I and World War II, they were reasonably stable countries. Obviously, there was a lot of issues, but the main sparks were caused between countries, not within. But I can see the issues becoming within countries as opposed to cross border. And the governments of Europe just seem to be obsessed of just moving away from having a culture of their own to be proud of, and it's no, we'll just import all the different cultures and then we won't have any more problems. And it's just narrow-minded and totally false.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the flip side to there being no more war, like, you know, Clement Attlee's famous quote, if the race is mixed, well, the flip side to that, of course, is that if you are attacked by a homogenous country, there's less and less people who would be prepared to stand up and fight and die for the country because they don't feel any loyalty. So, you know, like everything, it's a double-edged sword. And I think that if that is the ideological motive behind what they're doing, I personally think it's very short, and I think we all agree it's very short-sighted, like you pointed out. I think, Laura, before I move on, is there anything you want to add on Orban's baby boom policies?
Not really, just if you aren't following Defend Europa on Twitter, do give us a follow, because we keep a very close eye on Hungary's fertility rate, and we do write a lot of articles about the good stuff that Viktor Orban's doing, because there's so many horrible negative stories coming from Europe about, you know, France and Germany and stuff, and Hungary's kind of like that shining light that we've got in the corner that we do like to write these white pill articles about every now and again. So do give us a follow on Twitter if you haven't already, because Hungary is one of the countries that we really do keep a close eye on. Yeah,
I'd second that, and I think we do. It is important to not just look at the downsides, but also follow the success stories, if only to show people in the West, look, it can be done. So don't lose hope. This is what's possible if you have a government that's prepared to fight on behalf of its own people. So I think we've done what we can on Orban's fertility drive. Now there's another story. This is interesting. It's still developing. It's not, you know, it's a vague thing at the moment, but I think Laura's going to tell us more about it in a minute. But basically, Salvini has spoken out about the central bank and the gold reserves and other things. So Laura, if you want to just tell the audience basically what's the deal here.
Yeah, so I woke up this morning and checked my Twitter like I usually do, and a lot of my mutuals that are friends from America had posted this article by the Financial Times, and they were all writing, it's happening, like this really exciting thing was happening. But I think people have maybe jumped ahead of themselves a little bit. But it is good news. So basically, Matteo Salvini, who is Italy's Deputy Prime Minister and Interior Minister, has taken aim at the country's central bank and stock market regulator. So he said that the management of the Bank of Italy and Consob, which is Italy's stock market regulator, have to be completely cleared out. And he said, I'm talking about reducing to zero, not just changing one or two people. And he's saying, we're here because those who should have supervised didn't supervise. And he said that they are fraudsters who have inflicted losses on Italian savers, and they should end up in prison for a long time. So as we know, Italy, it was reported last month, I think it was, that Italy have slipped into recession, or they did at the second half of last year. And the Bank of Italy have cut their prediction on economic growth for 2019 from 1% down to 0.6%. So Salvini is just basically kind of taking aim at the central banks and saying, you know, you don't care about Italian people. We need to get rid of you. So Giovanni Tria, who is Italy's economy minister, has said that the independence of the Bank of Italy must be defended. So he's speaking out against Salvini. And I'm sure, as you can all imagine, the European Union have also defended Italy's central bank. And Valdis Dombrovskis, I think I'm pronouncing that right, who is the European Commission Vice President for the Euro and Social Dialogue, has said that it's important to preserve the independence of the central bank and also of financial supervisory institutions. So it's basically just Salvini saying, he's drawing attention to the fraud of the central bank and just saying we need to get rid of it. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. You know, nothing's been put in place, so we don't need to get too excited. I don't think we're going to take on the banks or anything yet, but it's good that Salvini is speaking out about it. And Luigi Di Maio, who is obviously the leader of the Five Star Movement, he's the other deputy prime minister in Italy, he's on Salvini's side as well, so they're both speaking out about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. But I think I agree with you. My initial reaction when I read the details was actually people are getting a bit excited too early, because I think what people need to remember about the Italian central bank is it's not like, especially for British people, it's not like the Bank of England. It doesn't really have an independent monetary policy. Regulation of the economic forces has been repatriated to the EU central bank since 1998, and the 17 central banks of the Eurozone, they can issue currency, but they have to ask permission and get clearance on a specific amount from the European Central Bank. So the actual political logic of, say, destroying the Italian Central Bank might not be that great, because you'd end up having Brussels print your money, which would probably suck. But so on that point, just to play devil's advocate here, I don't mean to trash a potentially good story, but on that point, do you think that this is actually a more cynical move by the government of Italy, because they need to raise the funds for their deficit spending, so they want to sell the gold reserves? They want to take over the gold reserves and sell them. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, definitely, and that's what critics of Salvini are saying. So Italy, I believe, has something like the third highest gold reserves after the USA and Britain, or something like that. And obviously, with them,
yeah, they've got. I think they've got a lot more than us. It's
oh, are they? I think we're in the top three. Then maybe they're second, and we're.
Yeah, they're definitely in the top three.
They have a lot anyway, and obviously, you know, articles like The Guardian and stuff that critique Salvini all the time are saying that the country's in a bad state financially. So rather than him accepting responsibility and cutting spending and stuff, because we know that he's very lenient when it comes to social policies for the Italian people, he's kind of just shifting the blame off to the banks and saying that they're going to spend the gold reserves. So that, I mean, that's what people are saying, and who am I to judge potentially? There was actually an article on the Financial Times about the gold reserves, but it's one of those ones where you have to subscribe, and I'm not a member, so it won't let me access it now. But if anybody can post it in the chat, it is an interesting article, and it does go into that in a bit more depth.
The thing is about the gold reserves anyway. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to sell them, because they don't serve any purpose. The euro isn't backed by gold, so well, no currencies. I don't think any currencies are these days. It's just every currency is a fiat currency. So there's no real problem with selling off those reserves. So I don't know why the liberal media are critiquing him on that. I don't think that's an issue. It's just, I mean, personally, I would like to see some of these populists start going down that avenue and talking about, you know, okay, we can talk about immigration and whatnot, but there's some real fundamental structural problems with our institutions, particularly central banks, which we need to address. So it is good to see some noises being made, even if they're not necessarily hitting the right note at this point. Darth, you've been quiet for a while. What do you think about this story?
To kind of go back to what you were saying about playing devil's advocate, like Italy's obviously had this problem. You know, it was one of the countries which really, really struggled from the financial crash in 2008. And I think one of the articles that was shared in our group earlier on had said that Italy had entered a technical recession in the second half of 2018. The Bank of Italy cutting its GDP forecast for 2019 to 0.6 compared with a 1.1% forecast. And at the same time, the European Commission slashed its GDP forecast from 1.2% to borderline recession of 0.2 for the full year. And I seem to remember there being something that the EU or the European Union had basically forced Italy to go back and rejig its financial policy for the next year, or its budget for I'm guessing 2018 to 2019. I can't remember exactly, but you know, the thing I have is when you have a country that is controlled that much by a central conglomerate or central group of people, to me it's you can make all the noise you want about shutting down a central bank, but if you have the EU effectively having kind of veto control over you, it's very difficult to really take back control of your own finances if the EU can turn around and say, no, we don't like your financial policy, go away and think about what you really should be doing, which we want you to do, and come back when you've done it properly this time.
Yeah, I think this is the central problem with any noises that they make about monetary policy, because at the end of the day, whilst they still use the euro, they're beholden to the European Central Bank, and the European Central Bank can simply refuse to allow them to print the money that they need, which is why, going back to the point you made on them being asked to go and change their budget, I think because the deficit was too high, I think that's why Salvini wants to sell the gold reserves to fund the spending, rather than have to turn around and say, sorry, we can't fund what we promised, which I think is fair enough. But I think it also begs the question, I know they spoke about this before, but it begs the question why they haven't looked at introducing a parallel currency or a replacement currency, because that's the only way you can have fiscal independence, is by having your own sovereign currency and a central bank that answers to the government. Otherwise, what can you do? Laura, what do you think about that? Because I think the issue here is that if you want to take on the central bank, it's got to be a European-wide thing. It can't just be one country, because every country, all 17 countries that use the euro officially, are beholden to the central bank. So I think, you know, do you think this is an issue that European political parties would have to make a point of campaign in European Parliament elections, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, well, we do have the obviously the EU elections coming up in May. I think it is the 26th of May, and Salvini and Di Maio are actually going against each other in that election. So I think I was reading a couple of articles today that they were saying that maybe they're just kind of getting the, you know, the anti-establishment and the anti-sort of EU conversations going, because, as I said, the EU obviously support the independence of Italy's central bank. So I'm not sure if they're just kind of trying to get the, you know, the anti-establishment line to be out there a little bit more before the elections come up. But yeah, I do agree with what you say. I think it does have to. I don't think that one country can just decide, I'm going to do this, and then nobody else is kind of, you know, on the line with them, because we've seen that before and we know what happens in that kind of situation. But yeah, I'm not really sure what to add, other than I think it's positive, but I think we need to just kind of not get a little bit too excited, and you know, just monitor the situation really and see what it does. And the European elections, which are at the end of May, are definitely something to keep an eye on, see kind of what direction he goes in after that.
Yeah, I definitely do think that it will be a European-wide struggle. And like you said, we all know what happens when a country decides to bypass international finance mechanisms and make their economic policy sovereign. They end up under a pile of rubble. So on that happy note, I think we should probably move on to have a look at what's going on in the chat. There's normally a few interesting points. I'm just going to have a look to see if we've had any questions to look at. Let's have a look. So I'm going to focus on this one first. In the chat, Pagan Goddess asks, what's to be gained by this, meaning the attack on the central bank? Seems like a cheap populist point. Maybe I'm missing something, but is there anything real to be achieved here, or is just pissing off the establishment? I mean, I think we sort of covered that in our devil's advocate bit, but is there anything you guys want to add on this point?
Well, when it comes to the gold reserves, obviously there's something to be achieved there, because it's finance, isn't it? But I think with him, I mean, we know that Salvini's a guy that I think sometimes he speaks before he, you know, thinks about what he said, and he's not scared about taking jabs at people. So I think he's probably maybe kind of wanting to be authoritative and saying, I have a problem with that, it's against the Italian people. But I'm not sure what actions it will actually lead to. As I say, we're going to have to just keep an eye on that and see what happens. But I think it's a good thing that he's made clear that, you know, he's got issues there. And if they are making Italian people struggle financially and he's addressing that, then that's just what he's always campaigned for and always said. So it doesn't surprise me that he said it, really. But yeah, I'm not sure what will happen. We'll just have to watch. I'm not sure, you know, what he's hoping to achieve by saying it at this stage.
Yeah, it's an interesting story that I guess the only way we'll know the answer to whether it's a cheap populist point or not is just to watch it unfold and see what happens. But see if he's a man of, well, we know he's a man of action, but to see if he's a man of action on this particular point will be interesting. So Salty Dog asks, has anyone ever explained why a small decrease in population is apparently a bad thing? Well, from the way I look at it, actually populations fluctuate in size naturally. That's actually natural based on, you know, the environment and resources and everything else. And population fluctuations downward are not a problem at all, provided you're not replacing the missing, provided you don't need the people and you're not replacing them with foreigners. That's the problem. It's not necessarily whether we have 10 million or 100 million people, it's who they are, not what, you know, how many they are. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this point.
I mean, the population of the world was relatively stable up till effectively the Industrial Revolution, and then once technology and medicine really took off, then you had a massive population explosion. So yeah, like you said, populations have risen and fallen for years, and obviously wars were happening all the time. I mean, you look at something like the Mongolian Empire, who killed between 10 and 80 million people over the space of 40 to 60 years. You know, that was a common occurrence, and you haven't really had that now since kind of the mid 20th century. So there hasn't been a huge drop in population for a long time now. But like you said, it's who you're replacing your population with. But when you have the way I see it is when you have the entire Western world, effectively the countries which are the best off, are choosing to have less children because A, it's easier, and B, it's too expensive to have many children. For a lot of people, it's then, well, who is then going to support the economy and the elders of the country in 20, 30, 40 years if you have an increasingly small pool of people to help the economy through work?
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. And like you mentioned, historically, populations were a lot more volatile in terms of their size in the past. I think just while you were saying that, it did make me think of something that I wanted to add, and that's that I think one of the problems that we've got in the West is that after the war, and especially in the 80s, from the 80s onwards, we decided to say, okay, government's going to take a step back and we're actually just going to let the markets do their thing, and the markets will determine all of these issues. And unfortunately, the market is saying we want cheap foreign labor. So that's what's happening, because you're letting the interests of people who are out just to make money in the short term dictate the long term interests of the national community. And I think the free market has succeeded in certain areas for small and medium-sized businesses, but on big issues of national importance like population stability and the ethnic composition of a nation, government has got to be prepared to step in, and like Hungary is doing. And I think that's to their credit.
Yeah, the other thing I just kind of wanted to add in, and obviously that you can debate this a huge amount, is another reason why we have a decrease. I had said earlier on, it's becoming more and more expensive to have children. Well, the West now has a much higher standard of living than it did in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s. Every family, or most families, now have a car. Almost everybody has a smartphone. Everybody has a television in their house, whereas before that just wasn't a thing. So to have the same kind of standard of living that everybody expects now, you have to be earning more money, and I guess people are choosing to have that higher standard of living rather than more children. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's possibly true, and I think again, it comes down to a question of moral guidance, doesn't it? You know, are we making a mistake? Well, I think we are, but we should ask the question of society's leaders: is it a mistake to teach people that earning money to buy yourself cool shit is more important than having kids? So I think that's a question we should ask. in the chat, the same person as the previous question asked, will Britain have to vote for MEPs in the spring? To be honest, I'm pretty remiss on this issue. I haven't been following the Brexit stuff at all. So, Laura, do you happen to know much about the Brexit situation?
Was it a question about the European election in May?
Yeah, whether Britain's going to have to.
Yeah, I think once the transition, I mean, we don't know if the transition period is going to start yet, do we? Because we've only got a month and a half until we're supposed to leave. But I think, as far as I know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that once we're out and that transition period starts, which takes us until December 2020, we basically don't have a say anymore. So I think they're talking about reducing the size of the parliament from March because we're leaving. So even though we're kind of tied into all these EU laws and stuff still, with May's awful deal, is if that is the route that we do go down, we don't have any say. So I don't think that we do. I'm 99% sure.
Yeah, personally, I don't think that. I think that there'll be some conversations about this that none of us are privy to, of course. That. And I think the conversation will go something like this. So, Mrs. May, you need to get your deal through because we don't want you sending any more populist MPs to the European Parliament. And Theresa May is going to say, well, Mr. Tusk, you've got to give us a good deal then. And you know, there's probably some negotiations because neither side, it would be very embarrassing for both sides if Britain sent a bunch of Brexiteers to the Parliament. It would be embarrassing for Theresa May. It would be embarrassing for Donald Tusk and the European Commission. So, you know, I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think it's going to happen. So, next question. George Mackenzie asks, how do we get more people to this channel? Very good content. Well, thank you, George. And you can share, like, subscribe, post it everywhere, put it in group chats, whatever. That is the best way to spread the channel, and we'd be very grateful for you doing so. I'm just going to have a look. Are there any more questions? Let's have a look. Right. No. Okay. We'll close it there then because nobody's asked any more questions. I think. Let me just check. No, nothing. Okay, folks. Well, in that case, that's all we're going to do today. If you'd like to contribute to help us to continue doing what we're doing, then if you look in the description below, there's links for you to donate if you'd like to. We'd be very grateful if you do. And as I said before, please be sure to hit like and subscribe. And as ever, thanks for listening. Good night, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.